Hello and welcome. Where we listen, we relax, and we get sleepy. I'm your host, Thomas. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. We'll begin a dreamy retelling of the classic tale, Beauty and the Beast. It's a perfectly autumnal story to lead you into a good night's sleep. Let's just take a moment to settle in and let go of any unease lingering in the body or mind. Make yourself comfortable, and as you ease into stillness, just allow your breathing to draw out a little longer, particularly on the exhale. Focus your attention as much as you can on your breathing. Let the slow, steady rhythm of the airflow become a mindful and soothing experience. When I speak to you here, prior to each story, I try to say the things that I know I would want to hear if I were falling asleep to this show. I've found the process of getting to sleep, in particular, rather difficult throughout much of my life. I still have bad patches nowadays, but I've gradually learned to remain calm and not let it stress me out on those difficult nights. Yes, it can make the next day a fair bit more challenging, but getting worked up about it only brings more wakefulness. So remember, while you listen along tonight, you can use your breath to help pacify any stress, tension, or worry. It's a simple yet effective way to calm the nervous system and guide you into a beautiful night's sleep. And that's especially true when you combine those deep breaths with a dreamy bedtime story like this one. It's a tale as old as time. So without further ado, drift into the fairy tale world of Beauty and the Beast. Deep in the heart of the woods, just behind a village, was a small kingdom brimming with fairies. These fluttering fairies lived in little houses that they built for themselves using the things that the earth had given to them. Some lived in the hollowed-out parts of tree trunks, while others patched together large, thick leaves to make homes. Other fairies borrowed holes in the ground, like little moles. They were protected by the trees that housed them and the earth that loved them. The fairies were Mother Nature's creatures. It was their job to protect the land in these woods, to heal and nourish the trees, and to feed the soil. In return, Mother Nature protected the fairies. She kept them hidden away from the prying eyes of the humans who lived nearby. People in the village near the woods had heard stories of the fairies and longed to catch glimpses of them. But the trees stood as a barrier between the village and the guardian fairies. Whenever a human came too close, the tree branches would tickle their head or sway across the path, blocking the way. Sometimes the path itself would confuse travelers by shifting entirely. The fairies had to remain hidden so they could do their work and live peacefully in their homes. But once every few years, someone slipped through the cracks. Most times, they didn't mean to. It was simply luck, coincidence, or sometimes fate. An autumn afternoon, not so long ago, was one of those rare, unforgettable days. It was a day when the woods themselves seemed to make a quiet decision to allow a guest to pass, and perhaps even to glimpse the fairies hidden within. The air was brewing something secret and expectant in its cool breeze, while the clouds hung low in a misty gray, doing their best to hide the sun. Yet the sun refused to disappear entirely. Its beams slipped through narrow gaps in the clouds, brilliant rays that scattered softly across the forest floor. Wherever the light touched, dewdrops clinging to amber leaves began to sparkle like tiny gems. The woods glowed, subtle and alive, as though holding their breath. A girl was walking down a narrow path, illuminated by a single, wandering sunbeam. Her name was Evie, and she loved autumn more than any other season. As she moved through the woods, she admired everything around her with quiet wonder. She inhaled deeply, breathing in the sharp scent of pine needles mixed with damp earth and fallen leaves, and smiled as the ground crunched gently beneath her boots. To Evie, this was sensory magic. That was how she would describe it later in conversation with her mother, before setting out on her afternoon walk. There was something undeniably enchanting about autumn. Everything about it delighted her senses. The sound of leaves breaking underfoot, the cool air against her cheeks, the endless tapestry of color woven through the trees. She lifted her gaze to the canopy above. It looked as though the forest had been set ablaze, glowing with burning reds, golds, and deep oranges. Even though the sky remained gray and heavy, the trees still shone with warmth and color, as if storing sunlight within their leaves. Evie barely noticed which direction she was walking. She was too busy looking up, too busy admiring the beauty that surrounded her, and the trees noticed her. They felt her admiration, her gentle love, and they welcomed the warmth they sensed in her heart. Because of that, they allowed her to continue walking, even though she was nearing a secret part of the woods. The branches did not reach out to trip her. They did not brush her neck or tug playfully at her hat. Instead, they parted just enough to let her pass. Evie continued forward, hardly glancing at the path beneath her feet. She did not notice when it changed. She did not notice when it suddenly veered off to the left, nor when the earth beneath her began to transform. The grass and fallen leaves slowly vanished, replaced by something solid and unfamiliar. She only realized something was wrong when the sound beneath her feet changed. No longer was there the crunch of leaves. Instead, her shoes tapped sharply against stone. Evie stopped and looked down. The dirt trail she had been following through lush green grass was gone. In its place stretched a narrow cobblestone walkway, smooth and old, as though it had been there for centuries. The path was tightly lined with red maple trees and thick shrubs, forming walls on either side. There was no easy way off it. Evie now had only two choices: to turn back, or to follow the path wherever it might lead. She turned and looked behind her, hoping to spot the familiar dirt trail. But all she could see were green grass, scattered leaves, and tall, looming trees. The trail had vanished completely. Evie stood still, uncertain. She lifted her eyes to the clouds drifting quietly overhead and wished it were evening, so that the North Star might appear and guide her. If only there were something, anything, to show her the way. For a moment, she considered turning back and wandering through the woods until she could make sense of where she was. But something stopped her. It felt as though an unseen finger gently pointed her forward, back toward the cobblestone path beneath her feet. A quiet voice inside her seemed to encourage her to go on. Instead of fear, Evie felt excitement bloom in her chest. The thrill of something new hummed in her heart. In that moment, the rest of the world faded away. All that remained was the path before her and the wonderful possibility of adventure. So Evie began to walk. She watched her boots step carefully over the glistening stones. Each footstep was cautious and quiet. Yet she did not feel afraid. She felt happy, curious, even eager. Whatever this little path was leading her toward, she felt ready to meet it. After only a few more steps, Evie suddenly halted. She heard a distant scuttling sound, like tiny feet pattering against stone. At first, she thought it might be an animal, a mouse, perhaps, or a squirrel. But then she heard deliberate footsteps and realized it was something else entirely. Something smaller, something lighter, something magical. Evie didn't truly believe in magic anymore. When she was very young, she once thought she had seen the garden gnome on her front lawn wink at her. On another occasion, she had mistaken a dragonfly for a fairy. But those were childhood fancies. After she turned 12, all thoughts of magic faded away. Magic belonged in books, she decided, or so she thought. Now, standing on the cobblestone path, Evie found herself staring down at a tiny green person, no bigger than her finger. He had delicate, fluttering wings and was gazing up at her with open curiosity. Evie rubbed her eyes. This had to be a dream. She had walked through these woods hundreds of times and had never seen a cobblestone path, let alone mythical creatures. Shaking her head, she shut her eyes tightly, hoping that when she opened them, she would be back home in her bed, but instead of the comforting scent of cinnamon, candles her mother burned every autumn, she smelled damp earth and rich pine. She felt the cool breeze against her skin. Slowly, she opened one eye. She gasped and stepped backward, tripping on a stone. Just as she began to fall, something wrapped gently around her waist and caught her. Looking down, she saw a long, sinewy branch, one belonging to a red maple tree. The tree lifted her upright and then slowly withdrew its branch. Evie blinked. Once again, it was just an ordinary tree. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure what else to say. The tree waved its branch, as if to say it was nothing at all. Heart-pounding, Evie turned her attention back to what had startled her before. Hovering in the air were several small people, no bigger than her hand, their wings shimmering with soft, multicolored light. They inclined their heads toward her, studying her with the same curiosity she felt for them. "Fairies," Evie whispered, breaking the silence so she could be sure this was real. The fairies watched her closely. No human had entered their village for years. One fairy frowned at the surrounding trees, clearly displeased, while the others smiled with cautious excitement. If Evie had found her way here, they reasoned, then something good must have guided her. Smiling, they flew closer, gently tugging at her fingers and clothes, coaxing her further down the cobblestone path. Evie followed. The path ended at two small willow trees, their graceful branches forming a curtain of green leaves. As they parted, Evie stepped forward and felt the air change. Behind the willows, it felt like summer. Warmth spread through her body, and suddenly she regretted wearing her autumn clothes as she crossed into a world unlike any she had ever known. The hat and scarf her grandmother had knitted for her lay warm and familiar against her skin. Before her stretched a village, the smallest village Evie had ever seen in her life. The entrance to the village glowed with brilliant sunlight, a light that seemed to belong to neither day nor night. The leaves of a great willow tree brushed softly against Evie's cheeks as she passed beneath its hanging branches. The fairies released their hold on her and fluttered downward, scattering into the village and disappearing among the tiny homes spread out before them. Evie lifted her gaze to the blue sky above, where white clouds drifted lazily like fluffy boats upon a gentle sea. The sun shone brightly, warm and inviting, its rays wrapping around her as though offering a tender embrace. She suddenly felt the urge to peel off her autumn layers and lie down on the ground, surrendering herself to the comforting heat of the sun. Before her, a cobbled path stretched onward, forming the heart of the tiny town. At its center stood a tall building, or rather, tall only by fairy standards. Evie guessed that if she were standing beside it, the building would reach no higher than her waist. The cream-colored structure appeared to be made of stone, standing solid and enduring, as though it had been there for centuries. It reminded Evie of the houses along her own street, the ones her mother often spoke about in loving detail. Homes built hundreds of years ago, yet still standing strong against the passing of time. Embedded in the center of this building was a large clock. As Evie looked up at it, she realized with a start that it was nearly tea time. She should have begun her journey home quite a while ago. A group of fairies stood gathered in front of the clock tower, carrying items they seemed to have collected from the forest. Acorns, curled orange leaves, and bits of bark. When Evie approached, they all turned toward her in astonishment. Several stared with open mouths, and a few even dropped what they were holding in their surprise. Evie hesitated, careful not to venture too far into the tiny village for fear of stepping on something or someone. From where she stood, she could see that on either side of the cobbled path were intricately crafted homes, built entirely from natural materials. One house caught her eye in particular. It appeared to be nothing more than a neatly piled heap of leaves and twigs. But then a small head poked through an opening, and Evie quickly realized it was a home. She was so absorbed in the wonders around her that she nearly missed the fairy who had quietly flown up in front of her face. This fairy stood apart from the others. She wore a long dress of flowing yellow silk, and her glowing brown hair cascaded down her slender form. Her wings were larger than the rest, and shimmered with the same golden hue as her dress. Her face was delicate and kind. Evie couldn't help but smile as the fairy drifted closer. "Hello," the fairy said. Evie stared in astonishment. For some reason, she had never imagined that fairies could talk. Perhaps it was because they had tugged at her clothes instead of simply asking her to follow them. "Welcome to our home," the fairy continued. "I suppose you are here for a reason? Or perhaps the trees themselves decided it was time for a visit." The fairy tilted her head, waiting patiently for Evie to respond. But no words came. All around them, the other fairies watched in quiet anticipation. At last, Evie spoke. "I don't know how I got here," she said softly. "I'm so sorry to disturb you." She took a cautious step backward and glanced once more at the clock. "I really should be heading back now," she added. "It's getting late." The fairy smiled gently and nodded. "If the trees deemed your visit necessary today," she said, "perhaps they will deem it necessary again, on another day, when there is more time." At that, two fairies fluttered toward Evie. They sparkled in the sunlight, as though suspended in a cloud of shimmering dust. Or perhaps it truly was fairy dust, Evie thought. After one final look at the magical village, she turned and followed them back the way she had come. They led her in silence, which suited her well, for Evie felt utterly awestruck and had no words left to give. By the time she reached the dirt path, Evie became aware of just how tired she was. She waved goodbye to the fairies and wandered home, her head floating somewhere among the clouds. The events of the day replayed in her mind, and she could hardly believe any of it had been real. When her mother asked how she had spent the afternoon, Evie didn't know what to say. She wasn't even sure what she had done. All she knew was that she had gone for a walk and discovered a world so extraordinary that she felt the need to pinch herself each time she remembered it, just to be sure she wasn't dreaming. After dinner, Evie took a warm, relaxing bath. It felt as though she were washing the forest away, picking twigs and bits of moss from her hair. She changed into her pajamas and slipped into bed. Outside her window, the sun had vanished, replaced by a glistening full moon. As Evie rested her head on the pillow, her weary mind finally made sense of everything she had seen that day. Now she knew that fairies were real, and she knew she would return to the woods as soon as she could. Evie turned off the light and closed her eyes. She was certain she would dream of moving trees and tiny, glittering people with beautiful wings. After only a few deep breaths, she fell fast asleep.